Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Issue Lecture Series. Before we begin the event, we ask that you take a moment to silence all of your devices. My name is Dr. Amanda Wan, and I'm the founder and coordinator of the Asian Issue Lecture Series at the Institute of World Politics. For those who are new to the IWP, we are a graduate school of statecraft, national security, international affairs, and intelligence. We have a doctoral program as well as 5 master's programs and 18 certificates of graduate study and a continuing education program. The objective of this lecture series is to broaden the scope and discussion on a range of intelligence, foreign policy, and security issues attendant to the Asian geopolitical, socioeconomic, and cultural spheres of influence. Today, we have Colonel David Maxwell, who will be presenting his lecture on Beyond Nuclear Crisis, New and Long-Term Strategy for the Korean Peninsula. Colonel David Maxwell is the editor-in-chief of Small Words Journal. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, a senior fellow at the Global Peace Foundation, where he focuses on a free and unified Korea, and a senior advisor to the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy. He's also a 30-year veteran of the U.S. Army, retiring as a Special Forces Colonel. He has worked in Asia for more than over 30 years, primarily in Korea, Japan, and the Philippines. Colonel Maxwell served on the United Nations Command and Combined Forces Command and United States Forces Korea CJ3 staff, where he was a planner for North Korean instability and regime collapse plans. He later served as the Director of Plans, Policy, and Strategy, and then Chief of Staff for the Special Operations Command Korea. He commanded the Joint Special Operations Task Force Philippines, served as a G3 for the United States Army Special Operations Command, and culminated his service as a member of the military faculty at the National War College. Following retirement, he served as Associate Director of the Security Studies Program at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service. Colonel Maxwell is a fellow at the Institute of Korean American Studies, an advisory to Spirit of America, and on the board of directors of the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, the International Council of Korean Studies, the Council on Korean U.S. Security Studies, the Special Operations Research Association, and the OSS Society and the Small Words Journal. Well, thank you, Colonel Maxwell, for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Wan. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate the opportunity to come to this august institution and in this historic facility. It's always good to be here, so I thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the Institute of World Politics. I really appreciate it. So I'm going to talk about North Korea, and Dr. Wan said I'm going to talk about a new plan, and I'm going to, spoiler alert, I'm going to focus on a free and unified Korea, which just to say up front, this is what I think is really what we need to focus on beyond the nuclear crisis, and I'll talk more in detail about that. What I do, in addition to what Dr. Wan said, I really focus, I have a nonpartisan perspective. I'm not a member of any political party, and so I support our national security and foreign policy regardless of who's in power. And I focus on these issues. I also teach a course, and I teach often down at Joint Special Operations University. And of course, I edit the Small Words Journal. And for you students out there, I'd be happy to talk to you about publishing your work. I always tell you, first write for your professors, write to get an A, but always think about publication and developing, turning your work into published writing. And I'm certainly happy to help you do that. Okay, so just some caveats up front. I'm going to make some pretty bold statements to you today, but I want you to know that I believe in peace on the peninsula. I believe in peaceful unification. I believe in diplomacy. I want to give all of that a chance, but of course I don't believe in weakening the ROK-U.S. alliance or our ability to deter war and to defend South Korea. Like I said, I'm going to make a lot of statements that are pretty declarative. They sound like facts, but the fact is there are no experts on North Korea. North Korea is one of the hardest intelligence targets, and really nobody knows what's really going on inside. So I'm going to give you my views, based on my experience, based on my studying, based on the writings and statements from North Korea, from the Kim family regime. But everything I say can and should be challenged. So I'm happy to take questions and to talk about what I've said. So don't, because I say something that might sound like I'm declaring it as a fact, it can be challenged. So the Korea challenge. The Korean situation is really unique. That small peninsula in Northeast Asia is, of course, connected to all the threats that exist. The revisionist and rogue powers, the two revisionist powers we talked about in our last national security strategy, Russia and China, and of course the rogue powers, and I like to call them the revolutionary powers, Iran and North Korea, because both Iran and North Korea declare themselves as revolutionary states. I think it's important that we approach North Korea and the Korean security situation from the view of Korea. It's not Iraq, it's not Afghanistan, and of course we don't want to see anything like that happen on the Korean Peninsula. As I read today, Ambassador Trani wrote an article in the Washington Times and saying we need a new strategy based on unification, which I wholly agree with. And he said peaceful unification. And again, I want peaceful unification, but whether there is peaceful unification or not is really going to be a function of the decisions that Kim Jong-un makes. And so, we can strive for peaceful unification, but of course, we need to prepare for the worst. And Sun Tzu said, never assume the enemy's not going to attack. Make yourself invincible. When we were writing the collapse plans in North Korea, we said, never assume North Korea is not going to collapse. Prepare for the worst. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. There could be war, but whatever happens, it's going to take us being able to outthink the problem. And it really have to apply intellectual rigor to what goes on in North Korea. And we need deep understanding of the problem, the regime, and the people inside North Korea, the Korean people living in the north. And you'll hear me say that. I try not to say North Korean people because, as the South Korean Constitution says, it is a unified Korea. South Korea, the Republic of Korea, is responsible for the entire Korean Peninsula. They have sovereignty over the entire Korean Peninsula, which means all the Korean people. So I don't like to say North Korean people. I like to talk about the Korean people who live in the north and the Korean people who live in the south. One Korea. And of course, when it comes to people from the north, we often talk about defectors from the north. I don't like to use that word either. I have many friends who have escaped from the north, and I like to use escapees. Defector has such a pejorative sounding, has such a pejorative connotation. You defect from your country, you're a traitor to your country. But those who escape from North Korea, they're not traitors to North Korea. They are escaping from one of the most despotic regimes in the world. And so I like to call them escapees as well. All right. I always start off with these 5 questions. And every chance I get talking to policymakers, I ask, what do we want in Korea? What do we want to achieve in Korea? And of course, most people say denuclearization or peace and stability. And those are important. But the second question really gets to what we really need to think about. And of course, when we talk about strategy, we talk about ends, ways, and means. And so we want to know the ends. I choose not to use the ends, though, because I was mentored by Lieutenant General Jim Dubik. We shared offices when we were at Georgetown together, and we used to discuss this. And he said, we really shouldn't talk about an end state because that implies the end. And in strategy, it never ends. There is never an end. And yes, we did see an end to the Cold War, but did it really end? And so he advocates, and I accept his reasoning, and I borrow his terms that what is the acceptable, durable political arrangement? That's really what we have to see. Whether it's a military operation or diplomacy, we're talking about acceptable, durable political arrangements that really will support, protect, and advance the U.S. interests, and in this case, ROK-U.S. alliance interests. And so I asked that question. First, the third question is derived from Dr. Jung Pak. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and Pacific. And I've attended many conferences with her, and she always asks the question, who's Kim Jong-un more afraid of? The U.S. military or the Korean people living in the north? And of course, it is the Korean people living in the north, especially when armed with information. And armed with information about the South, about what life is like in the South. You know, that's really a threat to Kim Jong-un. And of course, we can see the actions of the party, the actions of the regime, the crackdown on information inside North Korea. I mean, to this day, they just had another party meeting and talking about, demanding absolute loyalty to Kim Jong-un, from the people and from all members of society. Information from the outside world is forbidden. And of course, people who have access to the outside or are caught with information from the outside world are subject to, really tremendous or horrendous punishment. They are trying to limit information. And that should be a clue for us that if information is a threat to the regime, if it undermines the legitimacy of the regime, maybe we should be helping get information inside North Korea. And of course, if you're familiar with the politics in the South, the previous administration, the threats from Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, that she made, against South Korea and threatened and then actually blew up the liaison building, South Korean liaison building inside Kaesong because of the information that escapees are sending over the border. And then, of course, that coerced the previous administration and the National Assembly in South Korea to pass the anti-leaflet law, because North Korea is so afraid of information. And the previous administration and their vision for peace on the Korean Peninsula really, frankly, in my opinion, was really a strategy of appeasement. And it really showed in the passage of this law. So information is really important, and we should focus on that. Last two, of course, is have we seen any indication of North Korea giving up its strategy? And its strategy is based on subversion, coercion, extortion, blackmail diplomacy. Blackmail diplomacy is really the use of increased tensions, threats, and provocations to gain political and economic concessions. That's what the regime is trying to do. Of course, the short-term concessions that it really seeks is the end of sanctions. And we can see that almost everything that Kim Jong-un does is trying to get rid of sanctions. I've heard from escapees and talking to them that the failure to get sanctions lifted in 2018 and beyond is one of the largest failures of the regime in its history. And Kim Jong-un told the elite, told the military, that he would be able to manipulate President Moon and President Trump and get sanctions relief. And the two most important things that came out of both those administrations, or the single most important thing, was they did not lift sanctions. And that continues to put pressure on Kim Jong-un. And of course, sanctions, that's a whole other debate. North Korea is doing a lot to evade sanctions, being very successful at evading sanctions. We're not applying the sanctions, enforcing them strictly enough. China and Russia are complicit in sanctions evasion. North Korea is conducting global illicit activities around the world, proliferating weapons to conflict areas, all to gain hard currency. But the fact that sanctions have not been lifted is putting pressure on Kim Jong-un. And so, have we seen any indication that the strategy of Kim Jong-un has changed? And it has not. It is the same as his father's and his grandfather's. And it really seeks domination of the Korean Peninsula. He's using political warfare, blackmail diplomacy, while simultaneously preparing for war, developing advanced military capabilities. But both those paths, both those lines of effort, political warfare and warfighting, seek one objective: domination of the peninsula, and under what I like to call the guerrilla dynasty and gulag state, because I think that really describes North Korea. And of course, lastly, have we seen any indication of North Korea giving up its supporting strategy to split the alliance, split the ROK-U.S. alliance, which, of course, we assess as the key condition that Kim Jong-un needs to be successful if he conducts a military operation. He needs to drive U.S. forces off the peninsula. End of extended deterrence, end of the ROK-U.S. alliance, drive U.S. forces off the Korean peninsula, and then Kim Jong-un may assess that he has the correlation of forces, the combat power to be successful if he attacks. Now, I don't believe that. I don't think he'll be successful in an attack, but we have to try to put ourselves in his shoes and be concerned with that potentiality. All right, in a nutshell, I think everybody knows, everybody has heard this so much, that the vital national interest is survival of the Kim family regime. But it's not that simple. People will say, well, if it's survival, why don't we just pay them off? Why don't we send them to, like we've done with other dictators? You can go live in a Dhaka in Russia, or in, some mountain area in China, and we can pay him off and make him, rich for the rest of his life. I don't think he wants that. I don't think that's what he wants. To survive, they need unification. They need to dominate the peninsula. That is what is going to ensure regime survival. And I think it's important to assess that and to analyze the situation that way, because they really need to achieve that domination in order to survive. And of course, the key condition, as I've already outlined. And lastly, I think the other thing that strategic outcome that Kim would like in the interim would be to be treated like the former Soviet Union, would be to have arms control negotiations. And there are people that are proposing that. Many thinkers out there, thought leaders and think tanks, and there are people that think we should shift from denuclearization to arms control. And that sounds logical. We did that with the Soviet Union, but the problem I think that we will face if we move to that is that it will confirm to Kim Jong-un that his political warfare strategy and blackmail diplomacy works. And what that means is that he will keep his nuclear weapons. Maybe there will be limitation, maybe a reduction, but in either case, that means he's still going to have nuclear weapons, which is what he wants. I've often thought that some of the systems that he's developing, we've seen the Hwasong 16 and 17 and 18, all these systems. We've seen some tests, that the 14 and 15, but I wonder sometimes if they develop systems to present us with a missile that they in fact never intend to develop, but are willing to negotiate away. And so we need to really be careful about that. But the bottom line is I worry about arms control negotiations and how Kim Jong-un will exploit that. And I think, frankly, in my opinion, offering to do that will not make Kim Jong-un negotiate in good faith or become a responsible member of the international community. Even to the level of the former Soviet Union. And even that's problematic. But it will not change his behavior. Instead, he will exploit arms control negotiations for his own ends. So, when I talk about Korea, when I think about Korea, I put it in perspective of the Big Five. I think war, everybody knows we want to deter war. We want to prevent war. And I think that's really the number one U.S. interest, is to prevent war on the peninsula, because if there is war on the peninsula, it's going to have global effects. You've got the second and third largest economies, China and Japan, the 10th largest economy, South Korea. You've got two nuclear powers, China and Russia. Of course, North Korea, we won't call them a nuclear power, but they possess nuclear weapons. And some of the largest armies in the world, concentrated in Northeast Asia. And of course, those economic ties are global. And if something happens on the Korean Peninsula, it's going to affect the supply chain, it's going to affect financial markets, it's going to affect all of us here in the United States and around the world. So we have, I think, a strong interest to try to prevent war on the Korean Peninsula. And so we must always keep a foundation of deterrence and defense on the peninsula. Now, regime collapse, a lot of people talk about, regime collapse would be a good thing. and sometimes you want to be careful what you wish for. I don't think it will be like East and West Germany. I think that if there is collapse on the Korean Peninsula, it's going to be catastrophic for a number of reasons that I'll talk about. The most important, though, the conditions that might lead to regime collapse, which is the loss of the party's central governing effectiveness combined with the loss of coherency and military support for the regime, those conditions could lead Kim Jong-un to make a decision to go to war as his only option to survive. So regime collapse is a dangerous scenario, and one that we must be very cognizant of. If it happens, it will likely be catastrophic, and there will be some level of conflict. So we really need to be careful about that. Human rights. You might wonder why a military guy talks about human rights and is concerned with human rights. Well, North Korea is one of the worst countries in the world in history for abusing human rights, crimes against humanity. But not only are human rights a moral imperative, they're a national security issue. Why is that? Because Kim Jong-un must deny human rights in order to remain in power. The 2014 UN Commission of Inquiry did a comprehensive study of the human rights situation. And Justice Kirby from Australia, who led the study, they assessed that the human rights abuses in North Korea, the crimes against humanity, are among the worst since World War II. And I would argue that it is 70 years of human rights abuses. They didn't last that long in World War II. So the scale of human rights suffering is just beyond our imagination. And so it's really important. But I'd like to make one point. We focus on North Korea's nuclear power. And the more we emphasize the nuclear threat, the more we legitimize the regime. But when we talk about human rights in North Korea, it's a threat to the regime. It undermines the legitimacy of the regime. So if you think about influence, an influence campaign, maybe we should talk less about the nuclear threat and more about human rights. And for a lot of reasons. Because it's the right thing to do. It gives hope to the people inside North Korea who don't really understand, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that they have a right to live by. And so we should understand the human rights situation, and we should take a human rights upfront approach. I'm reminded of Ambassador Bob Joseph, who serves on the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. And he was in the Reagan administration and the Bush II administration doing arms control negotiation. And when Reagan was negotiating with the Soviets, he was told by the negotiators, the professionals, that he should set aside human rights. Because you don't want human rights to get in the way of a negotiation and a successful negotiation, because it will just block everything. But President Reagan did not follow that advice. You heard him say, "Tear down that wall," and they did not hesitate to talk about human rights. We should do the same with North Korea. We should never ever sacrifice human rights in North Korea in the hopes that there will be a denuclearization agreement, because I just don't think I don't think that by avoiding human rights that it will lead to a denuclearization agreement. So we may as well focus on human rights, because you got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. The asymmetric threats that exist in North Korea. We talk about nuclear weapons, missiles, their special operations forces, but also their global illicit activities, the counterfeiting, the drug trafficking, all the things they do around the world to gain hard currency as well, overseas slave labor, all these things, and of course cyber operations, and then subversion. They're actively trying to subvert South Korea, subvert the South Korean political system, to weaken it, to make it collapse, so that it can dominate the Korean Peninsula. Of course, last is unification. And unification is the toughest challenge. It's the difficult path, but it's the right path. And I think it is the solution. All right, subversion, as I mentioned. North Korea has the United Front Department, like all communist countries, the 225th Division, or Bureau, that that's really charged with infiltrating agents into the South to create political parties and to subvert the political system. But really, when it comes down to this is an ideological war between North and South. It really is which values do the Korean people want to subscribe to? The shared values, the U.S. and the ROK, or the values, in air quotes, the values of Kim Jong-un and the Kim family regime. And I think, to us, I think it's clear which values I think the Korean people would subscribe to, and if given the choice in the North, I think they would subscribe to these as well. So there's an ideological component to the conflict on the Korean Peninsula. And as I said, North Korea is conducting its political warfare. I like to say political warfare with Juche characteristics, but again, actively trying to subvert South Korea. All right, so this is some of the challenge, and we really need to do a deep dive into the culture of North Korea. But let me just say that the country, the system that Kim Il-sung developed, really rested on this anti-Japanese partisan warfare. He built this myth that he was a great guerrilla leader, the commander of the 1st of the 88th Special Independent Sniper Brigade, and he claims, and the myth of North Korea claims, that they liberated Korea from the Japanese. And I think if you read Sid Seiler's book on the myth, the building of the legend, I think Kim Il-sung conducted like one military operation, during World War II. They attacked a Japanese police box and killed about 15 policemen. And that was really the extent of his operations. He wasn't a great guerrilla leader, but they turned it into this, this great myth. But that permeates everything in their society, permeates their culture. And that's why Adrian Buzo, the Australian author and researcher, he wrote a book entitled it The Guerrilla Dynasty. That's why I used the term guerrilla dynasty. This ethos really permeates everything in North Korean society. And of course, it's what we need to understand because that indoctrination is going to cause many people to live to fight another day. And we really need to be concerned with that. All right, 1953, the Armistice Agreement. Buried in there in paragraph 60, it talks about the Korea question. And I use the Korea question in this way, the way that it's described here. The Korea question is really, when you really read this paragraph, they're talking about the unnatural division of the Korean Peninsula. And the military leaders who signed the armistice, see Mark Clark and General Harrison and Na Mil and Kim Il-sung and Peng from China, they recommend that the political leaders come together to solve that problem within 90 days. And there was a conference in Geneva about a year later, and it really never went anywhere. This question has never been answered. There must be a solution to the Korea question, and that's either two countries, one country, two systems, or a united Republic of Korea, a unified peninsula. I think unification is the only way to resolve the Korea question. I've talked about collapse. The problem with collapse, the problem with war, the problem with the complexity, the uncertainty and complexity of the Korean situation, it really causes planning paralysis, strategic planning paralysis, because nobody can really foresee what's going to happen. And all the scenarios are really mind-boggling to deal with. And so it really puts us in a position where we really don't plan for it, we don't think about it. And we only think about lesser objectives, denuclearization, maintaining the status quo, preventing war, which I don't discount. But my belief is the only way we're going to see an end to the threats is through unification, and we should focus on that. Now, our presidents have, going back to 2009, every president in South Korea and the U.S. in their joint statements, their joint vision statements, have talked about peaceful unification. These are the ones from the joint vision of 2009. And President Lee and President Obama, President Park and President Obama, Trump and Moon said that South Korea would take the lead in achieving peaceful unification. President Biden has talked about unification in a speech at Yonsei University when he was the vice president. And in his special op-ed that he wrote for Yonhap in October of 2020, right before the election, the only op-ed he wrote in a foreign paper, he talked about unification. Yet, when he had a summit last May in 2021 with President Moon, and then this past summit with President Yoon, they did not talk about unification. I'll give President Yoon's administration the benefit of the doubt. It was 10 days after the inauguration they had the summit, perhaps they haven't had time to work through the agenda. I do know that the National Security Advisor, or I've heard that the National Security Advisor for President Yoon is a strong proponent of unification. But the fact is, we didn't talk about it, and I think we should. All right, so these are the four paths to unification. As I said, it's uncertain, complex. We don't know how we're going to get to unification. Obviously, peaceful unification is the standard. It's the desired path. We want peaceful unification. But I think, like you, I think most people would agree that Kim Jong-un is not going to capitulate. Kim Jong-un is not going to give up and go quietly into the night and take a large sum of money, a buyout, and go live the rest of his life out. I don't think that's really possible. And I certainly don't believe that the 48 million Koreans living in the South would acquiesce to the North Korean system. They're not going to allow themselves to live under the yoke of the North Korean Juche ideology and their quasi-communist system. So why do we focus on peaceful unification? Number one, it's the right thing to do. It's the morally right thing. But I will tell you, it's right because it's the most difficult to plan for. Not because Kim Jong-un and the government of South Korea will never come to agreement. Planning for peaceful unification is the most complex. And you have to integrate two economies, two political systems, two militaries. And planning to do that is very difficult, very complex. But South Korea should plan for that. And the reason is because whatever path leads to unification, everything you do for peaceful planning for unification will have application in any other path. And so you plan for the hardest, plan for peaceful unification. It may seem counterintuitive, but plan for that because if there's war, God forbid, and this is, I hate to say it this way, war leading to unification will be an easier path than peaceful unification. Of course, we don't want that to happen. We don't want to expend the blood of military and civilians that will be expended, the treasure, but it will level North Korea physically and metaphorically and make unification easier. But everything you plan for in peaceful unification will have a role and will have application in that scenario. We don't want to have war. Regime collapse, as I said, could lead to war. And there's one other path that is an outlier, and that's internal change inside North Korea. Not regime change, externally driven, but changing dynamics inside North Korea. Again, it's the hardest target. It's difficult to understand, but we are seeing, we saw during the arduous march of 1994 to 1996, the famine, the rise of the markets, the Dongju money class. We are seeing indications inside North Korea that there is some resistance. Of course, the system, the sophistication of the Songbun system and the entire security apparatus inside North Korea is designed to prevent any kind of resistance. And, so they are, that system is functioning, maintaining oppression over the people, but we are seeing signs. What we don't know is what happens inside Pyongyang, inside the elite, what might happen to Kim Jong-un. I asked this question of policymakers. Think about this. What would you do today if you learned today that Kim Jong-un was dead? What actions would you take if he was dead? Okay, if you were the U.S. government, the South Korean government. I know what we would likely do, and that would be to wait and see how things play out. We saw that happen in 2011 when Kim Jong-il died. But maybe there's something else. You know, there's no succession mechanism in the North. Their party documents or constitution doesn't plan for that. We don't know if he has designated his sister as a successor or someone else. So we don't know what's going to happen. But have we wargamed out what we might do if we learn that he dies today? And I say that if we learn today that he died, not that he died today, because it might be some time before we learn that he has passed. Of course, the Chinese will probably know pretty quick. They'll probably get out. But you know, talking to escapees, the passing of Kim Il Sung and the passing of Kim Jong Il, the same thing happened both times, and that was they locked down the country, close the borders, and they bring the party members back to Pyongyang, and then they have the party meeting that will determine and invalidate the successor, who of course has already been chosen. We don't know if a successor has been chosen. The problem is right now, the country is locked down, and we can't really see if something happens, whether there is that movement of party officials to have that meeting. We could see it in other times. Our diplomats, you know, or not ours, but foreign diplomats in Pyongyang have a hard time seeing what's going on. We often get diplomats from European countries come to Washington, D.C., and we get to sit down with them. And one of the British diplomats, he made this comment that I think is so apt. He said, Pyongyang is the only capital city in the world that you have to leave to find out what's going on inside it. And I think there's some truth to that. One diplomat told me, I asked him, I said, so when have you ever had engagement with Kim Jong-un? He said, well, in the 3 years that I was there, I saw him 3 times, and that was at their military parade. And he said, well, they had all the foreign diplomats in one area, and he said one time he walked by, but when he walked by, he turned his head away from and never looked at us. He said that's the closest I ever came to engagement with Kim Jong-un. So, the diplomats do not have a lot of access and a lot of understanding of what's going on inside North Korea. But if something happens to Kim Jong-un, we need to be ready. And of course, if new leadership emerges inside North Korea, and if that new leadership has been shaped with information, shaped with knowledge of the outside world, shaped with an understanding of opportunities, maybe they will seek peaceful unification. And if that occurs, if someone emerges that seeks peaceful unification, all of the South Korean planning for peaceful unification will apply. So that's why I think South Korea should plan for peaceful unification, regardless of the security conditions, the political conditions, and the Ministry of Unification in North Korea should be the planning element for that. All right, I want to talk about information and influence. This is the most, I think that the most important thing that we can do, and I say we, I really mean the ROK-US alliance, led by Koreans, supported by the US. North Korea is the most ripe environment, a laboratory for psychological operations. There is a thirst for knowledge inside North Korea, and we really need to be able to use information, but we need to use it to shape this resistance and try to shape this guerrilla mindset and give them opportunities to be able to develop and really reach leadership levels and ultimately to replace Kim Jong-un on their terms, not on our terms, not initiated by us, but with our support from a policy perspective, information perspective. It really needs to be organic, and we need to be ready for that. Now, for information influence activities, we really need a comprehensive strategic campaign for that, a holistic campaign that allows government agencies, military, civilian, and civil society. The only people we really see doing this today are the escapees. And now the ones in South Korea are doing this, breaking their own laws, which is going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And of course, if you saw the recent news with the COVID outbreak in the north, the Propaganda and Agitation Department is blaming the balloons in South Korea for bringing COVID to the north. They're sending medicines, they're sending information, but North Korea has accused the escapees of sending COVID to the north, which is kind of typical for them. But we are not taking advantage of what's happening inside North Korea. And there's so much potential. The growth of smartphones inside North Korea, they continue to grow and be used. Now, of course, they're not connected to the global grid, the internet, but I think there's ways to do that. Of course, they are connected across the Chinese border. Escapees use cell phones to get money to their families inside North Korea. And of course, North Korean security services turn a blind eye when they take a cut of that to allow that money to get to families inside North Korea. That's an opportunity for information, and there's much more that can be done. These are some of the things that we should focus on. I'm sure you've all watched Crash Landing on You, the Netflix video there. Of course, many conservatives in South Korea didn't like it, and one of the reasons they didn't like it was because it portrayed the Koreans in the north, including the Korean military, as human beings. And right before COVID, I was at a meeting with 3 escapees, including the one soldier who escaped in 2017 across the DMZ, was shot and wounded. And I asked them, I said, what did you think of Crash Landing on You? And what do you think the soldiers inside North Korea who are watching this, what do they think? And they said that it makes them want to come to the South even more. And one of the things that struck them was that this show portrayed Koreans in the North as human beings, not as the enemy, not as monsters. And it was important to them because they have never seen anything coming from North Korea, from the regime, from the propaganda and agitation department, that ever portrayed the South as human beings. They're always puppets of the U.S. They're less than human, so they appreciated that. And this is really important because the messages in these Korean dramas can really have an effect. Max, I can't think of his name now. Max Brooks, Father Mel Brooks. Us old guys know Mel Brooks, the great movie maker and comedian. But Max Brooks wrote The Zombie Apocalypse, World War Z, movie everybody I'm sure has seen. I was doing a project with him where we used science fiction writers to try to forecast the future, to give a look at the future. One of the things he told me when he wrote the book, he did a lot of research with the National Institute of Health, Center for Disease Control, and how to deal with pandemics. And in the book, he details quite extensively how to deal with pandemics in the context of managing the zombie apocalypse. And he said, now I couldn't write a book and tell people how to deal with pandemics. He said, but when I talk about zombies, everybody's interested. And, it's entertaining. But he said, I used real techniques that are actually used. And he said, by doing that, you plant seeds in the minds of people. And when faced with similar situations, they might be familiar with that. In the context of North Korea, if you create dramas about unification, about land ownership, about how politics will work at the local level, and you create stories, then you start familiarizing the people in the North on what it's going to be like, and you're planting seeds, and you're more likely to get cooperation when they are faced with a collapse situation. And so that's why we want to use information to try to educate, try to influence the people in the North. Of course, we want to identify key communicators. The 30,000 escapees, not all of them will be key communicators, but many of them are. There are many people that have escaped from the North that have reputations. And of course, we see, in the South, we have 2 assemblymen who escaped from the North, and now they have political, they're successful politicians. Miss Park in the UK, she's run for election 3 times and lost, but she's a great example of somebody who's in the UK political system from the North. And we see many escapees who are successful in South Korea and around the world. And those examples should be transmitted to the North to show what their fellow citizens have been able to do. You know, for all of you students, you know, this is my research project to you. You know, map the human terrain inside North Korea. We really need to know what's going on, down to the local level, the Indenbom, the political leaders at the village level. You know, we need to understand the market activity. We need to understand. There's a great professor, William Brown, who he's an economist, and he understands the North Korean economy like no other. And he tracks these markets and the market prices, and we really need people to become very, very knowledgeable about this, to understand what is happening throughout the North. So the bottom line is, you know, the only way we're going to see an end to the nuclear program, an end to the crimes against humanity, is through unification. You know, a secure, stable, non-nuclear, economically vibrant unified Korea that is you know, based on liberal democracy, free market economy, individual freedom, liberty, human rights, and rule of law. And that's really what we need. It's a united Republic of Korea that will be called UROK or UROK. And, so with that, I'm happy to take your questions and discuss any of these concepts here. Again, the bottom line is we're not going to see long-term peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula until there's a free and unified Korea. Thank you. Sir.
I had a question. One of the key conditions for Kim Jong-un was the dissolution of the alliance. Can you speak to efforts they have made to do so and how successful they are or not?
Well, I think they haven't been successful because the alliance remains strong, and I'm grateful for that. But I think number one is they in their propaganda they say that it is the United States and South Korea together has the hostile policy towards the North, and in their writings, you know how they define that is the hostile policy is, of course, our exercises. It is the military alliance. It is our extended deterrence. It is our nuclear threat against them. And so what they are trying to do is establish the conditions with those who believe that the way to negotiate with the North is to give them the security guarantees that they want. And unfortunately, we've given them security guarantees. You know, we've said publicly we have no intention to attack the North. We don't seek regime change imposed by us. We want peace and security on the Korean Peninsula. But that's not good enough for them. You know, they want to see concrete action. And the only way that they will have a security guarantee is an end to the alliance, removal of U.S. troops, and an end of extended deterrence and the nuclear umbrella over South Korea and Japan. And so they are pressing for that over and over again. And in their writings, in their negotiations, and in everything they do, it is the U.S.'s fault. And unfortunately, we have people in South Korea, in the United States, who, to this day will say, it's our fault, we're the aggressor. If we would just pull our troops out, North Korea they wouldn't need nuclear weapons. They'd give up their nuclear weapons. I would not take that bet. That just wouldn't make it for me. So they have an active policy. And of course, the other thing is, they accuse us of having a hostile policy. They're the ones with a hostile policy. The Iraqi U.S. forces that are deployed in South Korea are in defensive positions, 5 defensive belts to defend South Korea. North Korean forces are postured for the attack. 70% of their forces are deployed between the DMZ and Pyongyang to conduct offensive operations. They talk about our exercises. They conduct a winter and summer training cycle, and their winter training cycle starts after Thanksgiving and goes to March. And during that time, they start at the lowest level of training, individual squad level training, and progress until March when they are conducting large-scale combined arms maneuver. And March is the optimal time to attack South Korea because the ground is still hard, the rice paddies haven't been planted, mechanized maneuver is optimized at that time. That is why we have conducted, up until 1993, we always conducted Team Spirit in March, which used to be the largest exercise in the free world. And we would reinforce the peninsula with U.S. forces. We would conduct a large-scale maneuver exercise to bring South Korea and U.S. forces to the highest state of readiness in case of an attack. And so, and of course, in 1993, I participated in the last Team Spirit there, and we ended that in support of the agreed framework in '94. And we went for a couple of years without an exercise there until the military leaders convinced the political leaders that we needed to have exercises, at that time for the reason I stated. We started with RSOI, evolved to Key Resolve, and now we're naming them, Dongmain, 2201 and 2202. So we keep changing the names on those, but the need for exercise is important. Sir.
I admire your entire kind of integrated approach here. Because one of the problems, of course, with the collapse of the Soviet Union was that there really wasn't any kind of real planning for what to do to bring them into the civilized world. And I think there should have been a massive Marshall Plan that maybe would have prevented the lost decade of the 90s. But still, Kim Jong-un and family are fanatics, and they're not going to go. They're not going to go quietly. They're not going to go, period. And any kind of breakup scenario or regime collapse, it seems going to maybe 70% involve war. And if they have these nuclear weapons, they're going to use them because this is a dead end little isolated republic, and so it just seems that no matter what, the more pressing thing is to try to prevent the development and the mounting of these things on missiles, because that just that will lead to total annihilation if they're used anywhere. And as a corollary, what do you know that any of his missiles actually can reach Alaska and California? Has that been really verified by?
Well, I don't know that for a fact. Some of the reports that I've read, based on the tests that they've done, they project that they can reach even right here in Washington, D.C. There have been some projections. I can't verify that, and I don't think we'll, I don't think we'll ever know unless they do it. I think that the intelligence analysts are certainly looking at that very, very hard. I think it's important to understand your question. When Wang Zhongyao defected, he was asked, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il had spent all this money developing the North Korean military. Why haven't they attacked? They have developed the fourth largest military in the world. The creeping normalcy, forward positioning, and they haven't attacked. And he apparently said, the reason is they know they can't win a war against the South as long as the U.S. supports it, and they believe that if they do attack the South, the U.S. will use nuclear weapons. And so that tells us, one thing, our declaratory policy works. Our support to South Korea is a deterrence, our presence of U.S. forces. But it also tells us why they've been pursuing nuclear weapons since the 1950s. And I think that, the scary part of your question there is I don't think North Korea views nuclear weapons with the same kind of taboo that we do. I think that, if there is a war, they are going to use nuclear weapons. I think that they will use them to destroy port facilities, destroy the 7 UN bases in Japan. I believe that their campaign plan requires rapid occupation of the peninsula before the South Korean military can mobilize and before the U.S. can reinforce the peninsula. And so nuclear weapons and chemical weapons as well to attack the South Korean workforce, who are critical to the operation of the ports and for reinforcements. I think that they will use them as a matter of course, integrated into their plans. I don't think they'll use them as a last resort. I don't think they'll use them as desperation. I think that they are part and parcel to their campaign plan. And that's a scary thing. And that's why we want to prevent war. that's why also information is so important. I want to talk to the North Korean commanders, the corps commanders, the frontline commanders. If I were king for a day, I would have the South Korean soldiers conducting patrols on the DMZ, dropping off bags of cell phones. I'd have Samsung develop cell towers all along the DMZ, and I would try to connect with the commanders. I'd love to have the commanders in the South be able to talk with the commanders in the North. But what we want to do is we want South Korea to have a policy that if you don't attack the South, you'll have a place in a unified Korea. We want to give them options, options to not follow orders. Now, it may or may not work, but to me, it's a pretty low-cost investment to try to make it work. If you remember, the West Germans provided amnesty letters to the East German commanders, and most of them said, we're not going to follow this. Now, we couldn't do that in North Korea, but we can establish policies, or South Korea can establish policies. We can transmit that information, and we can give them options. And it may or may not come to fruition. But when the wall came down in Germany, those East German generals, they had those amnesty letters. They wanted their compensation, and so I think it's worth a try. We should be exhausting every information influence possibility to try to influence those corps commanders, everybody who has control of WMD. The basic thing is maintain control and security of your weapons of mass destruction until they can be rendered safe by appropriate authorities. That's a basic message that they need to achieve. We don't want them to use them. We don't want them to proliferate them. We don't want loose nukes. We want to give them the opportunity, and that they'll be compensated if they act in accordance with the policies that are established. So those are the kind of things that we need to do. But you're right. Collapse. It's not something we want to risk for, but we need to prepare for it, and because it will be catastrophic. Sure.
Colonel, thank you for coming to speak with us today. I wanted to ask about Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un's face-to-face interactions during 2018. And specifically, a lot of people often disregard those interactions as just for show and that diplomacy doesn't work. But in your opinion, does face-to-face interaction between Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un and future South Korean leaders have an effect in pushing towards what you argue for peaceful unification, either through building trust with face-to-face diplomacy or in allowing North Korean people to see some level of humanization of South Korean leaders?
That's a great question. I agree. I believe in engagement. As much as we criticized what happened in 2018, you could, say that it in many ways, it did take things for the future because of those direct engagements that didn't pan out. Trump established the red line of no missile test, no ICBM test, no nuclear test, and that became the red line, and therefore everything less than that, and we've seen, this is the year of missile tests. I think 19 missile tests have taken place so far this year. I think, and of course, I think that red line also, I think Kim Jong-un tried to exploit that with the Biden administration, to say that the test of the ICBM is Biden's fault. If Trump was still in power, that he wouldn't have done that. So I think that those are the kind of things that it causes there. But engagement is good. In fact, people ask me what caused Moon Jae-in's policy to fail. And I think his policy, I didn't agree with it. I think it was a policy of appeasement. But he had this peace agenda. He wanted to be the peace. But when he went to his policy effectively ended on September 19th, 2018, in Pyongyang, when he gave a public speech to the people in Pyongyang. And what happened is he gave this speech, again, that was panned in the South by conservatives because it was too conciliatory, it was too much North and South together. But the Korean people in the North listened to that, and they were impressed. They saw an articulate man who was passionate about Korea and who defied all of the caricatures of propaganda. And Kim Jong-un realized at the time that he made a strategic mistake. He allowed Moon Jae-in to talk, and that undermined all of the previous propaganda. And if you look from that date on, there was no more North-South engagement after that point. And you follow the propaganda, they reverted to the old days of just vilifying Moon Jae-in and the South Korean leaders because they had to restore that propaganda, and indoctrination in the minds of the Korean people in the North. And so, so my point is that the more engagement that there can be, the more contact with people, that is good for us. That opens up. But that's a threat. President Trump's mantra was, if Kim Jong-un makes the right strategic decision, then there will be a brighter future. Well, the right strategic decision, of course, was to denuclearize, and the brighter future was economic engagement. We didn't understand, or well, some people didn't understand, that both of those are a threat to the existence of Kim Jong-un. He's not going to give up his nuclear weapons, and if he gets economic engagement, that comes with people-to-people contact. That comes with companies investing. That comes with information into the North. So that's a threat as well. So it was not, they made this video with, an iPad that showed, hotels in Wonsan, and, that was not enticing, and that's typical of us as Americans. We make things that, from our perspective, that make sense to us, but I don't think we had a good understanding of Kim Jong-un and what he wants and what motivates him, and so that was problematic.
If I may, as a quick follow-up, since you say that Kim Jong-un stopped his interactions with Moon Jae-in after that September 2018 day as a result of fearing to undermine his own propaganda, why did he continue meeting with Trump, even in that sporadic DMZ summit in which he came to the DMZ when Trump tweeted at him? Why did he continue that interaction and allow that interaction to be broadcast from the ground?
I think part of it was that he believed he could get a deal. He believed, and I think, when you think about it, Kim Jong-un really did mess up because both Moon and Trump were the two most likely to make a deal with him. The stars were aligned, but he would not budge, and he wouldn't make a deal. It had to be on his terms, and he couldn't get what he wanted. And I'm thankful to both Moon and Trump that they didn't give in to Kim Jong-un. But Kim Jong-un could have made a deal. He could have given up. How many times have we bought Yongbyon nuclear power? We bought it a few times, and we could have bought it again. But he wouldn't give up enough to get what he needed.
Thank you so much for keeping this, Colonel. So my question, I guess I have two separate questions I want to ask. I guess the first is, you discuss how if Kim Jong-un feels regime collapse is imminent, he might turn to nuclear weapons, right? So I guess my first question is...
I didn't say nuclear, I said he will turn to his attack plan.
Right, turning to, right. And so that increases the risk, right? So I guess my first question is just, do you think that there's a risk that supporting internal resistance could increase the chances of him fearing for regime collapse and then thereby accelerate potential nuclear conflict? And then second, I guess, we've heard talks, especially on the campaign trail, about potential tactical nuclear weapons being deployed to South Korea. So I guess, what are your thoughts on that as well?
Well, certainly, yes. Internal resistance, that's a problem. And whether we support it or not, it's going to grow. And it's going to happen. So we got to be ready for that. I think, I advocate supporting it, and supporting it with policies, with information, not direction, not putting boots on the ground, as much as I'd like to, by providing them options, to see what comes next. That's how I would support. If there's new emergent leadership, these are the opportunities for North Korea and the Korean people in the North. So that's how I look at resistance inside. Tactical nuclear weapons, to me, it doesn't. There's anybody who advocates tactical nuclear weapons. I ask the question of, tell me your concept for employment of those nuclear weapons. How are you going to employ nuclear weapons to achieve military objectives or political objectives? The only thing that people really want with tactical nuclear weapons is for making some kind of statement. Some kind of thinking that has a deterrent effect. The fact is, U.S. policy has always been that we don't confirm or deny the presence of nuclear weapons. When I was in Korea in the 80s, we had to secure some of the nuclear weapon sites. Those were not made public. Those people didn't know where they were. And of course, if we publicly deployed tactical nuclear weapons to Korea, that would make every single U.S. base a target for protesters. think about the South Korean population and how they would oppose that. Certain factions of it. I mean, many people support it, of course, but South Korea is a democratic country, and there are people that will oppose the presence of nuclear weapons, and it will make what's happening at the THAAD missile site now, where the THAAD battery is, that's completely isolated because of protesters. The soldiers that are living there have to have food flown in. They are living in terrible conditions because the South Korean government is unable to stop the protests, and they cut the ground lines of communications. So if there were nuclear weapons in the South, it would really cause some real tough political problems. But we also would not achieve the effects that some desire, because unless we change our policy, we're not going to confirm or deny the presence of nuclear weapons. So it really, what are we really trying to do? But more importantly, how will we use tactical nuclear weapons to fight a war? That's the question I want, because the fact is that we don't need nuclear weapons to defeat North Korea. Our conventional weapons can destroy North Korea. Every single target in North Korea. We don't need nuclear weapons. They're not that useful in a wartime scenario. They are only useful, in a deterrence perspective, and the fact that if Kim Jong-un uses a single weapon of mass destruction, we had better respond decisively to that use. And in my opinion, the decisive response to that means no more Kim Jong-un. That needs to be the end point of our declaratory policy. They use weapons of mass destruction. We respond decisively to prevent any further use, and that means the end of Kim Jong-un. So that's my opinion, not U.S. policy. So don't quote me as saying that's U.S. policy.
I think the gentleman in the back had a question as well.
Yeah, Colonel, thank you for speaking with us today. Just to play devil's advocate, how would you respond to the argument that reunification will never happen because the South Koreans won't agree to the huge transfer of wealth that will be required, and it end up like Reconstruction where we try it and they say, never mind, it's not worth it. And that on the other side, the North Korean elites see what happened to Saddam and Gaddafi and know, hey, if we give up our nuclear weapons, we may end up, sodomized and murdered in a drainage ditch. And if we need to guarantee the survival of our regime, we can pursue a kind of Deng Xiaoping style liberal capitalism.
Well, the Chinese have been trying to influence the North to adopt that. For decades they've tried to. And the problem with that is, to reform means what they've done before is wrong. And they've built a system, that where the leadership is, they're godlike, that they're omnipotent, and omniscient. They don't do anything wrong. So to reform and make those Chinese-style reforms, they're not going to do. Okay, so because to do will undermine the legitimacy of the regime. So Kim Jong-un and Kim Jong-il, they were offered opportunities to, China would be so willing to help them change. They also don't need to look at Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or anything. They look at what South Korea has done to their own presidents to wonder how they would turn out in that situation. But in my estimation, if there's unification, there will be no more elite. Okay, that is either war, collapse. There's not going to be a negotiated, peaceful unification. The only way is if there's new emerging leadership that seeks peaceful unification. The elite that fear unification, they're not going to support it. They're going to either try to leave or something will happen to them internally. So I don't think that's to South Korea, Korean people saying they don't want unification. That's you look at the polls, and there are lots of polls that say people are turning against it. I think if you ask Koreans, and the way you ask the question is important. Do you support unification? Do you want unification? Most people will say yes. Do you want to pay for unification? Hell no. So it depends on what question or how you ask the question. My retort to you though is, okay, what's the alternative? So do you want to, if something happens inside North Korea, there's war, there's collapse, there's the leadership, something happens to Kim Jong-un, Do we just want to isolate North Korea and let 25 million Koreans in the North continue to suffer? Do you think that the Koreans in the South will actually allow that to happen? You know, what they say now is one thing. You know, when something happens, you know, I think, here's the story that I tell. I had a Korean admiral, I was having lunch with him, and he told me there's 2 miracles in Korea. I think you all know the miracle on the Han. That Korea has risen from the ashes of the war, become a democracy, you know, 10th largest economy in the world, you know, developed this soft power, K-pop, and really has become, you know, a major middle power. Only country in the world, the only developed country in the world to go from a major aid recipient to a major donor nation. You know, pretty impressive what South Korea has done. I mean, amazing. Well, I said, okay, what's the second miracle? He said, the second miracle is the miracle on the Taedong. The Taedong is the river that goes through Pyongyang like the Han goes through Seoul. I said, well, what miracle is that? He said, the miracle is after 70 years, the Korean people in the North continue to survive. And what he meant by that is that, you know, in Korea, the Korean people, the spirit of the Han, you know, that if given the opportunity, they will thrive. And of course, Korea had no history of democracy, you know, free market economy, all the things they've developed. There was no history. And until 1945, there was one Korea, you know, of course, at the time under the colonization of Japan, but going back 5,000 years of Korean history, one Korea. So they split in 1945. And in the North, you know, the people, when faced with hardship, they survive. Given opportunity, they survive, or they thrive. Faced with hardship, they survive. You look what happened in the arduous march of 1994 to 1996, and how North Korea survived. The Sunshine Policy in the South transferred billions of dollars to the regime. The regime survived. But when the public distribution system of the Communist Party and the regime failed, markets arose. That's why we have 400 markets there. That developed a resiliency inside North Korea. A nascent capitalist system exists inside North Korea. And a lot of entrepreneurial spirit. You know, so if you give the Korean people in the North the opportunity, they will thrive. And that is what makes one Korea. Both North and South Korea, one Korea. Now, the transfer of wealth, I disagree with that. You know, I disagree that it's just, you're not just going to give, go from $1,000 a year, you know, of personal income, you know, up to the $20,000, you know, in the South, you know, whatever the level is. You're not just going to give them $19,000 each person. No, they've got to develop, you know, and again, the lessons. You know, we talk about a Marshall Plan. Marshall Plan is you know, was unique to Europe. I think we should all remember that to countries that were developed. But we use Marshall Plan as a shorthand, you know, to say help development. But after the Korean War, we stunted the farming, the agricultural development of the South. Why? Because we were such good people. We were giving rice to South Korea. We were giving bags of, you know, I mean, tons of rice to South Korea, so farmers didn't have to farm. And throughout the 1950s, we were given, you know, all kinds of aid to South Korea, and they weren't developing. It wasn't until, you know, 1960, 61, we realized that we need to stop giving aid and we need to help them build their own institutions. You know, and that's, of course, what happened from 1960 to 1979 in the Miracle on the Han. Korea developed their own institutions. Now, you can argue the political system of Park Chung-hee, but, you know, the development institutions are what's important, not giving people aid. So in the North, we don't want to just give people aid. What we want to do is see the Korean people in the North own their land. We want to transfer from this communist socialist, you know, to a country of free people. And so if you're a farmer, you know, and I jokingly tell my Korean counterparts that you should be mapping all of Korea, you should be developing titles to all the land right now. So when collapse occurs, that you got, you know, Mr. Kim, and Mr. Park, you know, and Ms. Lee, you know, they're going to get the titles to their land, and they're going to own that. And that's important because we don't want a large refugee flow. You know, people will stay put, and people want to live where they've lived all their life. You know, even the 30,000 escapees still want to go back to the North. They want to go back to their homes. You know, and so we need to use that, or South Korea needs to use that as a way for unification. So I think that we can make those arguments that they don't want it, South Korea's got to be tough. They got to exercise leadership. They got to plan for it. Whether people want it or not, you got to plan for it. All military failures. Somebody I meant to say this in response to one of the questions. Elliot Cohen and John Gooch wrote a book called Military Misfortune. All military failures are a result of three things: failure to learn, failure to adapt, failure to anticipate. And it's the third one. We learn, we adapt, but anticipate. And I think we need to anticipate these scenarios, and we need to plan for them. Whether they happen or not, it's better to have a plan than to not have a plan when something happens. So,
you talked about influencing the next generation of leaders. And when Kim Il-sung died, everyone believed, the community believed, Kim Jong-il, he's a reformist. He'd spent a little time in Malta, briefly. And of course, he was more brutal than his father. When he died, everyone said, oh, Kim Jong-un, because he spent his teen years in Switzerland, that he would be a reformist. And yet he turned out to be even more brutal than his father or grandfather. So my question is, how do you identify the elites, the next generation? How do you get to them? Because they've seen what's available in the South. They have the cell phones. They see the K-pop. They've seen the dramas. But yet there's that conflict. They may realize, most of them do, this is a corrupt society, or this is inequality. They're so fearful. So how do you, one, identify them, two, how do you get to them?
That's a great question. One of my good friends, Kim Kwang-jin, escaped from North Korea. He ran an element in Department 39 in Singapore. He was going to be called back to North Korea. He was going to be punished. So surprisingly, his wife and his son were with him. And so they escaped. And his son, in fact, 2010 or 11, graduated from Fairfax County High School as the valedictorian. He came to the United States, couldn't speak English, and graduated from high school. So I ask this of Kim Kwang-jin all the time. What are people thinking? Explain to me the mindset. They know what's going on in the outside world. And his answer to me was quite shocking. Please forgive me as I say this. He said, all Korean people in the North are liars. And I thought, whoa, that's a terrible thing to say. And what he explained to me was that in Korea, you have to lie first to yourself. You have to lie to your parents. You have to lie to your friends. You have to lie to your political leaders, and in order to survive, because you cannot express how you really feel to anyone. And so, and he said, and this leads to, and this knowledge from the outside world, combined with this, leads to what he calls a psychological paralysis. And, it's really cognitive dissonance, but he calls it a psychological paralysis, where they have to survive first. And even though, they want the outside, world, it's fascinating to them, they have to survive. And so, every week they have to go to these, the sessions, the confession sessions, and they have to, and what, of course, the regime is doing is they're just collecting information on all the bad things people do, and so that they can use them later to prosecute. But my point is that we can't know who is going to, we can't identify. It's hard for us internally to identify those who have the right stuff, who's going to emerge. But as I look at escapees, I see tremendous potential. These guys, they came from North Korea, and they have adapted, and there is potential inside North Korea. We just can't identify it. So my point is, we need to cast a wide net, large amounts of information, and it's kind of like, we're going to throw mud against the wall and see what sticks. I didn't want to say, someone, hope is not a course of action, as General Sullivan used to say, but I am kind of talking about hope is a course of action. We hope that there will be some, but it's more than hope. I know that there will be, I believe that there will be people that will emerge, and that's why we need to use information to try to do that. We just can't identify and control from the way that we would like to identify those, as in other places identify emerging political leaders, support them, give them resources and things like that. That's not going to happen inside North Korea, I don't think.
Well, I think, you mentioned paralysis. I've met a number of North Korean diplomats when I served overseas. And I remember talking to one who was a legitimate foreign affairs, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he had been to Europe and different postings, spoke fluent English, graduate of Kim Il-sung University. And I remember talking to him about, the condition, the economic conditions in North Korea. And I showed him pictures of the hotel that has no windows or working toilets, and is tilting to one side. And I said, what about this? And his answer surprised me. And it wasn't, didn't get a sense it was this paralysis or lying. He said, yeah, we're aware of that. But you know what? We'll fix it ourselves. So part of that is the whole Juche concept, self-reliance. But I think there really are a number of, and I'm not trying to defend the regime, but there are a number of very patriotic people in the North who believe, whether they're being fed lies or they honestly believe it, but just in the country itself, that we will survive.
That is so important to understand because, a lot of the propaganda that the escapees send north, just vilify the regime, and that's the kind of thing we need to understand. A young woman escaped, and she told her story that she believed she was free inside North Korea because she was told she was free. Because their constitution has freedom of expression, freedom of religion. All those things are built into that. So she believed that she was free because she was told she was free. It wasn't until she arrived in South Korea that she realized what freedom and she says this, I was wrong. I had no concept of freedom inside North Korea. Although it pained me to hear her say this. She said, but when I was in Seoul, I was still very afraid that I might see an American soldier because we were taught that American soldiers occupy South Korea and that they would abuse Korean women at their will. So she was deathly afraid of seeing an American soldier. She eventually came to Washington here, and she said the same thing. When she saw Washington, she realized what freedom was. But I think that is something I don't think we can comprehend because we have, we've lived in freedom, and we can't imagine what it is like for somebody to to experience that. But yet, she evolved. She was exposed to the outside world. She's successful. We're seeing Koreans from the North be very successful. I mean, they're human beings, and they can be successful if given the opportunity. And that's what we need to focus on. The message is you can have a good life in a unified Korea, and those are the kind of things that we should be making a concerted effort to try to influence them. You've already had one, so.
So recently, Korea, Japan, UROK, Japan, USSR, trilateral exercises again for the first time in 5 years. And I just wanted to ask you, where do you see North Korea going from? How do we respond? For weeks now, we've been hearing that we're going to test another tactical nuclear plants. I feel like that was sort of what we're doing for a while, so I just wanted to know how you think they're going to respond to these trilateral exercises.
Well, they've already responded to that, as well as the concept of the Asian NATO. We're hearing them, both them and China, talk about that. I think that both China and North Korea, may have miscalculated, because it is a good thing that there is improving trilateral cooperation between Iraq, U.S., and Japan. Both North Korea and China does not like that. Remember what President Moon was forced into with the 3 no's, in Xi Jinping. No more THAAD deployments, no integrated missile defense, and no trilateral alliance. They are afraid of that. So the return to cooperation, I think, is really good. There's a long way to go. There's a lot of problems, as everyone knows, between Korea and Japan, historical issues. My belief is that President Yoon and Prime Minister Kishida have to both pledge to put national security and national prosperity first while they manage the historical issues and not allow historical issues to impact on security and prosperity. But the exercises that will be conducted, I hope it's an integrated missile defense exercise. I'm not sure. They're talking about August, that there will be some kind of trilateral exercise. We will conduct the major exercise that we conduct every year in August. But I think it's a good thing. And of course, the Biden administration's Indo-Pacific strategy, the 7th point of the 10-point action plan in their strategy is improve trilateral cooperation between ROK, U.S., and Japan. And we see the administration, working on that. The trilateral summit that just took place in Spain, and now bilateral meetings between the foreign ministers are going to take place in Singapore this week. So I think that's a good thing. Whether North Korea conducts a nuclear test in response to that, I think we have to also be careful about North Korea's tests. We tend to think that everything that they do is a message to us, and it may very well be, but it also they have to test to improve their capabilities, to develop their capabilities. And they may be at the point where they need to conduct a test to move to the next stage. Now, the timing could be significant, but it also could be that they just have to test to move to the next level. And so we have to assess it. We have to try to understand it. But it's not always all about us, And so, will they conduct a nuclear test in response to trilateral exercises? Maybe. But one thing I would say that every time they conduct a provocation, it is a chance for us to respond to show that Kim Jong-un's strategy will not work. We are not going to give in. And I think we've done that very well in the last few months. 19 missile tests. We've deployed strategic assets to Guam twice, now going to be a third time. F-35s to Kadena and Okinawa, and now to South Korea. Carrier battle group in the East Sea. Instead of backing down, we are demonstrating strength and resolve. And every time he conducts a provocation, we just need to quietly continue conducting exercises to show Kim Jong-un that he is not going to be successful in achieving his objectives through provocations and threats and increased tensions. Anybody else? You read?
I have a question.
Dr. Wong.
So you mentioned the internal resistance inside North Korea, and I agree with you that it is one of the key elements for us to bring about the Korean unification. And I was wondering, do you think there's any possibility of a coup specifically from the senior leadership of the North Korean regime?
Yeah, so Sungmin Cho Sungmin, he's a professor out at the Asia Pacific Security Center out in Hawaii. He got his PhD at Georgetown when he was getting his PhD. He and I spent some time together. He wrote a great article. On part of his PhD, he assessed the history of political assassinations, and he looked at the potential for a political assassination against Kim Jong-un. And after studying assassinations around the world, he concluded that the only way that Kim Jong-un could be assassinated would have to be a scenario similar to the assassination of Park Chung-hee. Somebody with access and placement, who would take action, and there won't be a coup, there won't be collective action because the system is designed to prevent that, because everybody tells on each other. So, we couldn't have this conversation, inside North Korea because you would tell your superiors, I would tell mine. So it's unlikely there'll be that collective action. But the most likely way will be somebody who acts out, somebody within the elite who has access and placement. Young Sung Lee, who's an escapee, he was in the demonstration unit in Pyongyang, and part of his military service. He went from the 4th Corps to that unit. And he was telling me that his unit, other than the bodyguard command closest to Kim, the only ones inside Pyongyang who are allowed to have live ammunition for their demonstrations. Every other military person, every policeman, that nobody has live weapons, live ammunition, except those who guard Kim Jong-un. And of course, that means he's pretty well protected, and it's unlikely there'll be collective action. But somebody within the inner circle, within the elite, you never know. So there's no way to project that. But Sungmin Cho's work is I think, pretty useful in looking at that.
Well, thank you, Colonel, and thank you everybody for coming today.